There's a clay tablet in the British Museum that contradicts every other tablet from its era. Catalogue number WB444, recovered from Uruk's temple district, dated to approximately 2900 BCE. The translator who processed it in 1952 filed it under religious mythology and moved on, but his margin notes, preserved in the museum's archive, record something he never published. This tablet doesn't read like the others, not worship, warning. The scribe who pressed these symbols into wet clay was elderly, dying, and he was trying to preserve something he knew would be deliberately erased. What he recorded matches the impossible numbers in every other Sumerian text, except he didn't call them impossible, he called them memory. I found tablet WB444 because I was looking for something else. I was tracing the evolution of Mesopotamian record keeping, trying to understand why administrative tablets from Uruk showed sudden standardization around 3100 BCE. The British Museum's Assyriological collection contains over 130,000 cuneiform tablets. Most document grain deliveries, temple inventories, tax assessments. Then there's WB444, filed in 1952 under creation mythology, essentially ignored for 70 years. The translator, Samuel Kramer, described it as fragmentary religious text. But the tablet isn't fragmentary, it's complete. And what the scribe recorded doesn't read like worship, it reads like testimony. Let me explain what I mean by testimony. Sumer was the earliest known civilization in southern Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq. The Sumerians built the first cities, Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, around 3500 BCE, before Egypt's pyramids, before Stonehenge, before any other complex urban society we can verify through archaeology. They invented writing, not mythology about writing, actual writing. The oldest readable texts on Earth are Sumerian tablets from Uruk, dated to approximately 3400 to 3100 BCE. Pictographic symbols pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus. Images representing concrete things, grain, sheep, numbers. By 3000 BCE, these pictographs had evolved into cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks that could express abstract concepts, grammar, complete sentences. We have thousands of these tablets. They weren't mysterious artifacts to the people who made them. They were tools, record-keeping technology for managing temple economies, tracking trade, documenting laws, utilitarian, practical. The scribes who created them spent years in training schools learning thousands of symbols, practicing until they could reproduce texts with perfect accuracy. And then there are the tablets that record something else entirely. The Sumerian King List. Multiple copies survive. The most complete is housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, catalogue number Ashmolean 1923.444. Additional fragments exist in the Oriental Institute in Chicago, the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, and the Louvre. The text was composed around 2100 BCE, but the scribes weren't inventing material. They were copying older records, preserving them. The King List documents every ruler of Sumer from the beginning until the composition date. That's what it claims to be, a comprehensive historical record. Here's the opening line, translated directly from the Sumerian. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, not granted by divine favour, not established through conquest, descended, came down from above to the city of Eridu, the first city, and was held there by the first king. Every copy uses the same phrase, kingship descended from heaven. The scribes treated this as literal description, not metaphor. The structure is consistent across every version, city name, king's name, reign length. Then the next city receives kingship, the next king rules, the next reign is recorded. Alulim ruled in Eridu for 28,800 years, not 29,000, not approximately 30,000, exactly 28,800 years, recorded identically in every surviving copy. His successor, Alalangar, ruled for 36,000 years. When kingship moved to the city of Bad Tibira, Enmenlu-Ana ruled for 43,200 years. Enmengal-Ana ruled for 28,800 years. The shepherd Dumuzid, the only pre-flood king identified by profession rather than divine title, ruled for 36,000 years. 8 kings total before the event the text calls the flood. Their combined reigns totaled 241,200 years across 5 cities. Then the King List records 7 words that appear in every copy. Then the flood swept over the earth. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven again, this time to the city of Kish, and the reign lengths changed immediately, completely. Ga-Ur ruled for 1,200 years, still impossible, but notice the scale shift, from 28,800 years to 1,200 years, an instant reduction by a factor of 24. His successor, Gula-Nidaba-Anapad, ruled for 960 years. Zuka-Keep ruled for 900 years. Within 20 kings, the numbers dropped to double digits. Zamug ruled for 30 years. Ilku ruled for 25 years. Iltasadum ruled for 36 years. Normal human lifespans, and by the time the King List reaches rulers, we can verify through archaeology. The reigns are completely accurate. Lugal-Zagasi of Uruk, a king whose inscriptions survive on stone monuments, ruled for 25 years according to the King List. Archaeological evidence confirms a reign of approximately 25 years. The later portions of the text are historically reliable, verifiable, cross-referenced with other sources. The early portions show the same documentary precision, preserved with identical numbers across every copy, but they're impossible. Scholars have explanations. The pre-flood numbers are mythological. They represent a golden age when divine kings ruled with supernatural lifespans. The numbers might encode astronomical cycles or seasonal patterns we no longer understand. The flood represents a theological reset, the boundary between mythic time and historical time. The scribes who copied these numbers for over 1,000 years understood they were preserving religious allegory, not actual chronology. Reasonable, except for one problem that nobody addresses. The scribes didn't treat these numbers as allegory. They embedded them in the same historical framework as the verified kings, same grammatical structure, same documentary format, same copying precision. If Lugal-Zagsai's 25-year reign is accepted as historical fact, and it appears in the King List with identical grammatical construction as Alulim's 28,800-year reign, what signal told the scribes where history ended and mythology began? Why preserve obvious errors with such meticulous accuracy? And if these numbers were symbolic, why not round 28,800 to 30,000? Why not vary them between copies if they're teaching tools rather than historical records? Every major king list shows identical numbers: 28,800, 36,000, 43,200, 241,200 total, copied by scribes in different cities, different centuries, different political dynasties. Perfect consistency, as if they were preserving something that couldn't be altered. And here's the detail that archaeology confirms. Other ancient cultures didn't invent impossible reign lengths for their earliest kings. Egypt's king lists, carved in stone at Abydos and recorded on papyrus by the priest Manetho, show normal human lifespans even for the most ancient dynasties: 30 years, 40 years, 60 years for an exceptionally long-lived pharaoh. China's earliest rulers in the bamboo annals and the records of the grand historian follow the same pattern. Japan's legendary emperors in the Kojiki were given extended but plausible ages: 100 years, 120 years, long lives, not geological epochs. The Sumerian scribes weren't following a universal pattern. They were preserving specific numbers that appear nowhere else in the ancient world, copied with perfect consistency for over 1,000 years, changing at exactly the same point in every text. The flood, which brings me to the flood, not the biblical version, though that story derives from earlier Mesopotamian sources, the Sumerian flood. The event that divides all of recorded history into 2 periods, before and after. The division is absolute, mathematically precise, consistent across every text. The pattern is this. Pre-flood kings live for tens of thousands of years. The flood occurs. Post-flood kings live for decades. The transition happens at one specific event recorded in every copy at exactly the same point in the chronology, not a gradual mythologizing of earlier history. Instant discontinuity. Why? What happened at the flood that changed the fundamental nature of kingship? Official explanation. The pre-flood numbers are mythological constructs representing a golden age when divine or semi-divine kings ruled with supernatural longevity. The numbers encode astronomical cycles or calendrical systems we no longer understand. The flood represents a theological boundary, the separation between sacred time and profane time, between the age of gods and the age of men. The scribes understood they were preserving religious symbolism, not literal chronology. Reasonable. Except the scribes left no indication they understood this as symbolism. And then there are the Anunnaki. The word appears throughout Sumerian literature, not a modern invention, not a misinterpretation, a specific class of beings in the oldest Mesopotamian texts. The etymology is precise and consistent. Anu was the supreme sky god. Ki meant earth. Now was a grammatical connecting particle. Anunnaki translates directly as those who from heaven to earth came, not those who rule heaven and earth, not those who dwell in heaven, those who came from heaven to earth. Past tense, descended, arrived. The Anunnaki appear in the earliest creation texts as the beings who ruled before the flood, who brought kingship down from heaven to Eridu, who governed the 5 cities, the same cities listed in the King List, the same pre-flood period, the same timeline. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest creation accounts, describes how the Anunnaki created humans, not out of love, not as an act of divine generosity. The god Enki, leader of the Anunnaki, shaped humanity from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god because the Anunnaki needed workers. The text is explicit. Before humanity existed, the Anunnaki themselves performed the labor. They dug irrigation canals, they maintained the temples, they farmed the fields, and they were tired. They complained to the higher gods. The work was too much. So Enki created a replacement workforce. Humans were designed to specification, built to bear the labor of the gods, not metaphor in the original text, literal description. The gods needed workers. Humans were manufactured to fill the need. Then Enlil, Enki's brother and rival among the Anunnaki leadership, decided humanity had become a problem, too numerous, too noisy, too independent. He convinced the other Anunnaki to destroy them. The solution was the flood. But Enki, who had created humans, warned one man, Ziusudra in the Sumerian version. The man built a boat, survived, preserved a breeding population. After the flood, the Anunnaki realized they'd made a strategic error. They'd destroyed their workforce. They needed humans. So they allowed the survivors to repopulate, but under different conditions: stricter control, shorter lifespans, limited knowledge. This isn't the biblical narrative of moral judgment and divine mercy. This is resource management, population control. The Anunnaki created too many workers, destroyed most of them, then restarted with a smaller, more manageable population. And after the flood, the Anunnaki kings with their impossible reign lengths are gone. Human kings with normal lifespans rule in their place. The Anunnaki remain present in the theology, receiving worship, demanding sacrifices, but they're no longer ruling directly. They've withdrawn. Here's what matters. The timeline overlaps perfectly. The King List records 8 kings with impossible reigns ruling 5 cities before the flood. The creation text described the Anunnaki ruling those same cities before the flood. The King List records the flood as a dividing event. The creation texts describe the Anunnaki sending the flood. The King List records normal human kings after the flood. The creation texts describe the Anunnaki withdrawing direct rule after the flood, allowing humans to govern themselves under divine oversight. Same events, same sequence, same cities, same discontinuity point. 2 independent textual traditions, same chronology, different perspectives. And then there are the ME Sumerian texts describe them as divine powers or divine laws. but the way they function suggests something more physical. The ME could be stolen, they could be transferred from one god to another, they could be carried, they could be lost and recovered. In the myth Inanna and the God of Wisdom, the goddess Inanna travels to Eridu to visit Enki. Enki gets drunk on beer and gives Inanna the ME, over 100 of them. She loads them onto her boat and sails away to her own city. When Enki sobers up and realizes what he's done, he sends demons to chase her and retrieve them. She escapes. The ME reach her city. Enki's demons fail. The ME are never clearly defined in the text, but the list includes both abstract concepts and technical knowledge: kingship, priesthood, truth, the art of metalworking, the art of writing, the destruction of cities, descending into the underworld, ascending from the underworld, sexual intercourse. They're described as objects that can be physically carried on a boat, transferred from one location to another, stolen while someone isn't paying attention. Not purely abstract divine principles, something concrete enough to load and transport on a boat. Cylinder seals from the Uruk period show imagery that doesn't match later conventions. The seals were rolled across wet clay to create official stamps for documents and storage containers. Most show predictable scenes: kings receiving tribute, priests making offerings, workers harvesting grain. But a subset shows something different: figures approaching beings who are larger, who wear elaborate headdresses unlike any known royal iconography, who are surrounded by symbols that disappear from later Mesopotamian art. Stars, circular objects with radiating lines, structures with multiple tiers rising vertically. The beings themselves are rendered at twice the scale of the human figures, not as artistic convention but as literal size representation. Some seals show these beings descending from above, surrounded by what early archaeologists described as wings, but which don't match any known bird anatomy. Geometric radiating patterns, symmetrical designs suggesting technology rather than biological structures. The seals are physical evidence, not literary mythology, and their imagery dates to the same period as the impossible king list reigns, the same cities, the same era when kingship supposedly descended from heaven. The language used to describe the Anunnaki is specific. They possessed melammu, usually translated as terrifying splendor or radiance, but the descriptions suggest something beyond poetic metaphor. The melammu of the gods could paralyze humans who approached without authorization. It could illuminate dark spaces. It could be seen from great distances. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero sees the melammu of the guardian Humbaba shining through the cedar forest before he sees Humbaba himself. The melammu announces divine presence before the being appears. It's not described as an aura or a spiritual glow. It's described as a physical phenomenon that affects the environment and human physiology. The Sumerian word melammu shares linguistic roots with Akkadian words for brilliance and gleaming, light as tangible object, not metaphysical quality, not coincidence, pattern. Kingship descends from heaven to Eridu. 8 kings with impossible reign lengths rule 5 cities. The Anunnaki, whose name literally means those who from heaven to earth came, govern during this same period in the same cities. These beings possess physical objects called ME that can be stolen, carried, transferred. They radiate melammu described as visible light with physical effects. They create humanity as a labor force to perform work they themselves had been doing, manual labor, physical tasks. Then they send the flood to reduce the population they created. After the flood, the impossible rains stop. Normal human kings rule with normal lifespans. The Anunnaki withdraw from direct governance. And for the next 2,000 years, Sumerian and Babylonian scribes copy these numbers, these names, these events with perfect consistency across multiple city-states, successive empires, different languages. There was a scribe in Uruk around 2900 BCE. We don't know his name. Tablet WB 444 contains a colophon, a signature section scribes use to identify their work. This one describes the author as one who has grown grey in service to the scribal arts, an elderly man. He served in the Temple of Inanna because the tablet was recovered from that temple's archive during excavations in 1912. The text opens with a phrase about completing final work before the end. He was dying, and he knew it. What did he write in his final tablet? He compiled a list of the Anunnaki by name and function. He referenced the King List numbers. He described the ME in detail. He made connections that later scribes would separate into distinct categories. Religious texts over here, historical chronicles over there, creation mythology in a different file entirely. But this scribe, this elderly man pressing wedge marks into wet clay in lamplight in a temple workroom, connected them. The beings who ruled with impossible lifespans were the same beings who descended from heaven. The objects they carried and could lose or have stolen were technology, not abstract theology. The flood marked the end of their direct rule. What came after was different, human, limited, mortal. And what came before was being systematically forgotten even as he wrote. By 1800 BCE, 4 centuries after this scribe's death, Babylonian scribes were reinterpreting the old Sumerian material. The Anunnaki became purely mythological figures. The ME became abstract divine principles rather than transferable objects. The King List numbers became symbolic representations of a golden age. The impossibility was filed under religious allegory and treated as primitive mythology from a civilization that supposedly didn't understand the difference between history and legend. But the Sumerian scribes understood record-keeping perfectly. They invented it. They maintained accurate grain inventories across decades. They tracked debt payments over multiple generations. They recorded lunar observations with precision modern astronomers have verified against computer models. They weren't confused about the difference between myth and documentation. They were meticulous, professional, trained, and they copied the impossible numbers with the same meticulous care they applied to everything else. The timeline is this. Before 3500 BCE, the Anunnaki ruled directly with impossible lifespans. Around 3000 BCE, the flood. After the flood, human kings with normal reigns. By 2500 BCE, the Anunnaki have withdrawn from direct governance but remain in the theology. By 2100 BCE, scribes are still copying the old numbers exactly. By 1800 BCE, reinterpretation begins. By 100 CE, the last cuneiform tablet is written, and the scribal tradition ends. By 1850 CE, we've forgotten how to read the script. By 1952, we're translating the tablets, but deciding in advance what they have to mean. Mythology, religion, primitive allegory, not memory. The tablets still exist. British Museum WB444 and WB62, Ashmolean 1923.444, Louvre A08864, Istanbul Archaeological Museum NI 3191. The King List has been published, translated, studied, anthologized. The creation texts are available in academic libraries worldwide. The cylinder seals are photographed, catalogued, displayed. Every piece of evidence is publicly accessible in climate-controlled museum storage. And the questions remain unanswered. Why would scribes preserve 28,800-year reign lengths for over 1,000 years if the numbers were symbolic? Why does every culture except Sumer record normal human lifespans for their earliest rulers? What were the ME that could be physically stolen and transported? Why does the discontinuity occur at precisely the same event in every independent text? Why do the beings' names translate to those who came from heaven if they were understood as eternal gods who always existed? What descended from heaven to Eridu? The last professional scribes who maintained the unbroken tradition from Sumer died around 100 CE when the final cuneiform tablet was written. 2,000 years of continuous record-keeping ended. The knowledge of how to read the script was lost. The tablets were buried in ruins across Mesopotamia for 18 centuries until excavations began in the 1840s. By the time we learned to read them again, we'd already decided what they had to mean. But the scribe who pressed his final warning into clay in 2900 BCE wasn't writing mythology. He was preserving something he believed would be deliberately erased. And he was right. The tablets are sitting in museum storage waiting for someone willing to read what he actually wrote instead of what we decided ancient people must have meant.